Right, here we go with another vidcast, and this week it's all about risk and challenge. Now, risk and challenge is something that you do every day, and it's actually one of the fundamental reasons that we take part in sport. I know we talked previously about our health and our physical fitness, but risk and challenge is the actual enjoyment part of actually taking part in some of those physical activities that you might do. Here's a pretty good example of 3 risky activities that people actually, spend quite a lot of time and actually pay for the privilege of doing. Especially when you get a little bit older, you might find that you choose to do this in your own spare time. So we've got a bit of bungee jumping, a fella trying to jump the Grand Canyon, pretty stupid, but it looks quite good in a photo, and then some gorge walking or coast steering, where you jump off cliffs into the sea or into very large, deep lakes. But which one do you think is the riskiest and why? Now, when we're looking at risk and challenge, we need to consider some very key things. And obviously, at any point, pause and then rewind and go back into if there's anything that you don't understand. But there are some key elements that you will need to look at and write down onto your key term sheets. So, this is the bit that we need to know. These are our learning objectives for this section of the unit. All pupils are going to be able to consider the aspects of challenge that is present in physical activity. So basically saying, when you were looking at a particular sport, what is the challenge or the risk that is going to be associated with it? Secondly, most pupils will understand the need for carrying out risk assessments. So, in a nutshell, why do you do a risk assessment? Why is it so important? And why is it something that every sporting activity that is done will have a very, very brief risk assessment, if not a very complete one? Thirdly, some pupils will know the importance of being aware of risk control. And we first of all need to know what risk control is about before we can realise why it is so important. And obviously we'll come on to that a little bit later on. So, pens at the ready. Here's our first key terms. Challenge is a test of your ability or resources in a demanding situation. So very basically, it's just saying, if it's very easy, it won't be very challenging. If it is, for example, just walking on, over a straight line, it's not very challenging. However, climbing a big mountain that's in front of you, that might take you all day and has got some physically punishing climbs and overhangs that you need to accomplish, then that is very challenging. Second key term, risk. The possibility of suffering harm, loss or danger. Dead simple. Again, we all take risk every day, and it might just be something as simple as crossing the road and trying to avoid traffic, or it might be something that is a little bit more risky and things that your parents may think that they wouldn't want you to do, but you get that adrenaline rush, and that is one of the reasons why people do these challenging activities. So, what are risky sports? Now, I just brought this up really quickly. We won't play the YouTube videos because obviously you can do that in your own time. But here we go. Street luging at number 10. Heli skiing, jumping out of a helicopter and then skiing down a mountain. Number 9. Big wave surfing. That's a 60-foot wave there. That's about the size of 3 double-decker buses. Pretty impressive when you watch it. Bull riding at 7. Then bull running. It tends to happen a lot in Spain. Pamplona, I think, is the famous one. Yeah, it says it up there at the top of the YouTube video. Cheerleading. I imagine there's some fairly horrendous things that go wrong there, and I'm sure that video will show you it as well. Motorcycle racing, very high speeds. High altitude climbing, where you're going to basically the top of the world where there's nowhere, so it becomes very hazardous as well as the physically punishing activity that it is as well. Base jumping, so jumping off buildings, cliffs, whatever it might be, and then releasing your parachute at some point on your way down. And then the final one, cave diving. That's just a little one that I found on the internet. I'm sure you can agree that they're all pretty risky. But why are they risky? Have a little think about it yourself. What makes it so challenging and high risk? So, we've previously mentioned that all activities are challenging, but we need to now specify them and put them into categories of what that challenge is. And we need to look at these categories in a little bit more detail. So first of all, we've got any sort of water-based sports. So you're thinking of your swimming, your kayaking, your rowing, and then to other perhaps more extreme ones like canoeing or surfing, where there can be some white water which can create some danger. You take part in possibly difficult water conditions. Obviously, the environment that we've talked about previously in our videos and in class can have an effect as well. But what is key is that challenge of the water, the environment around you getting wet, perhaps it being a strong current or a big wave, is the thing that provides people with a thrill. You'll very often find that people will go to different levels, so continually challenging themselves until they actually find that ultimate adrenaline rush. Now, challenge isn't just all about being on water, it can be on land-based activities as well. And we can also look at things like rock climbing and scrambling, as well as some of the other things like abseiling, which provide us with that physical challenge. If you notice, a lot of these activities tend to be happening in the great outdoors and outdoor adventurous activities. But we can put challenges down into more traditional sports as well. And the example that we've got on the screen talks about you being able to tackle a bigger opponent, rugby, or to run a set distance of 26 miles, Ironman, triathlon, whatever it may be. But those physical challenges are there to be seen in every single sporting activity. Now, moving swiftly on to risk assessment. Risk assessment is now a modern day necessity. If you went back 40, 50, 60 years ago, risk assessment was far less prevalent and therefore seen as not being quite as important. But nowadays, with the onset of litigation, so people being sued or people being held responsible and going to jail for some of the activities that they may run, risk assessment has become massively part of every physical activity and sporting person's life. Now, we make risk assessments really briefly, basic every day. Just by walking down the stairs, you'll look and see if there is any risk involved. 9 times out of 10, there won't be, but there could be something that might be able to cause you damage or harm, and therefore you'll process that within our brain. But when we go into a more formal situation, like playing a game of football or netball, there needs to be some more official documentation. So what it does, it identifies potential hazards or dangers, and then after that, it makes sure that all the sporting environment or the physical activity that you're doing is considered in order so that there are no foreseeable risks that you might actually come up against in the whilst you're actually taking part of it. A good example of this would be a ski trip. When people go skiing, people need to think about what potentially might happen to people so that therefore they can preempt all this sort of stuff and then make a informed decision about what they do if something did go wrong. So, for example, if somebody went off a jump at skiing, they might say that would be a high risk activity to take part in, and there'd be a high risk of somebody getting injured, but then they could say what else they also did to prevent that. Here's a really quick sample risk assessment of some of the stuff that you might need to think about in terms of who's at risk, what measures that there are to avoid that risk, how high the risk is of actually happening, and then what you might do afterwards and who's responsible for such areas. It's the bane of many PE teachers' life, writing risk assessments, but they are in place for every single thing that you do within your school environment. Maybe you should have a little think about what your risks are and what they are when you next do some sort of physical activity. Now, risk control. This happens after the risk assessments have been made. There may be a risk assessment just before a football game, making sure that things like any feces have been taken off the floor, any litter has been removed, and that is something that may not have been already seen at an earlier stage when organised by a team coach or a manager or whatever it might be. Now, once the risk assessment the controls are there to make sure that everybody who's involved, whether it be a coach, a referee or a player, follows the rules in terms of keeping people safe and stopping there being too high a risk in terms of the actual activity taking place. They need to make sure that they follow all the risk assessments to the appropriate level, and that people are behaving properly, and that the coaches take precautions in terms of doing a warm-up, whatever it might be, and that equipment that is used is in good working order. So there's nobody using illegal shoulder pads in the rugby game, or perhaps it might be something that would be faulty, like lifting some weights when people know that the machine is actually broken. As you can see, equipment plays a massive role in this. Boxers always wear gloves and head guards at an amateur level to minimise the risk when they're doing their activity. And organisers or coaches or managers, as already mentioned, might make sure that they're doing a proper warm-up, that they're not doing in a mixed sporting environment, which could actually damage some people, or a mixed age environment. It wouldn't make much sense for you to be playing rugby against the England rugby team down below, as you might find yourself getting pretty injured. A final necessity when looking at risk is that of safeguards. It's really important that, obviously, having identified what risks might be there and what you do afterwards, that these can be carried out. So you need to have a qualified first aider. The higher up in terms of professional sports you get, you'll find that there might be a doctor, a physio, a masseuse, and all sorts of people who can actually help out if there was such an emergency. Always make sure that there's a telephone available so that you can call for an ambulance if an emergency does happen, and that there are suitable people, and that you don't do any of these risky activities on your own. Right, little task for you. I'd like you to look at the task on the screen, then think about your answers for the physical and mental challenges that are given to you. But more importantly, for you to get that higher mark in terms of your B's, A's and A stars, you need to start giving reasoning, explaining your answer, giving a description, and then analysing what you've said. Right then, first part of your homework is I would like you to look at these two exam questions. Make sure that you look at them carefully, write them down, give your answers, and they need to be handed in at your next lesson, which will be next week, obviously. Thanks for listening. Remember, you can always look at this at any time. Look at the Twitter page, look on your emails, and also it should be available on your VLE as well. Any questions, please give me an email.